Well, well, well. Look who's here.
Hello, Gothamites. Brian Ward here with another episode of the Arkham Sessions. This is the only podcast that analyzes Batman the Animated Series through the eyes of a clinical psychologist. With me is that clinical psychologist, the psychologist to all of the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City and beyond, Dr. Andrea Letamendi. Hello, Andrea.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
I'm psyched. Last weekend was a tiring weekend for sure, but I would say a very gratifying weekend. Last weekend was WonderCon here in Los Angeles. What did you think?
WonderCon is the little brother, little sister of Comic-Con, for folks who are wondering.
That is true.
And I will say this I'm trying not to offend folks. Mm-hmm. I loved the show. I did not like the venue as much.
No, LA certainly is not equipped for a convention like WonderCon, certainly not equipped for Comic-Con. I mean, if they thought that this was a beta toward anything, like, bringing San Diego to Los Angeles, they are in a world of hurt. And, it's just not the right city for something like that.
No, I think the best example I can give that would illustrate how it doesn't quite fit is that there was a Kings game. I think either night, maybe even both nights, there was a game going on at the Staples Center. Yeah. And so at the end of the evening, you had WonderCon releasing its fans, the game releasing its fans. And so I didn't get the same feeling I have with downtown San Diego, the gas lamp district, where you just meet new people. You feel like you're amongst your people. This was just kind of a strange layout in terms of the restaurants, the hotels, just kind of the landscape of the city. So I just didn't get that sense of community and connectedness. I just sort of felt, this is going to sound weird, but I felt like my everyday nerd identity where, yes, I was enjoying something, but I was kind of self-aware, and even a little bit, just even a little bit cautious and concerned about, like, just needing to watch myself as I was leaving the convention center, which is not how I feel when I'm at San Diego Comic-Con.
Right. I mean, I didn't have that problem. I didn't feel like I needed to put my nerd guard up or anything. But yes, on Friday night, there was a Laker game. On Saturday night, there was an LA Kings game. And you find yourself competing with all of those fans, and then of course just people going to LA Live on a Friday or Saturday night to go see a movie or to see a concert at the local venue there, any number of things. Like, you just find yourself competing with all those people, and it's just not a venue that's made for that sort of thing. I will say this though, we had a pretty fantastic panel. It was probably the highlight of my weekend. I'm just going to go ahead and say it was the highlight of my weekend when you and I did the psychology of the Marvel TV universe. We did it with 5 writers of the 4 Marvel TV series. That's Daredevil, which we had Christos Gage, who was a writer on season 1. We had Agent Carter, and we had Jose Molina and Lindsay Allen, respectively. They are the co-executive producer and the story editor of Agent Carter. We had DJ Doyle, a writer for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., who's been there from the beginning. And then we had Scott Reynolds from Jessica Jones, and Scott is the co-executive producer of that series as well. Those folks were absolutely fantastic to talk to.
I would imagine that we could have a series of panels, like a full day, each panel dedicated to each of these shows, because there was just so much to talk about.
Yeah.
But I feel like we had a conversation. We were able to bring in discussions around traumatic events and recovery from traumatic events, character identity. We were talking about development of characters. We were talking about support systems. I think that we really were able to have a nice, broad discussion in terms of all the themes and all the points that we were trying to make, as well as actually even have rich explorations around a couple of the characters, like Karen from Daredevil, who's experienced a lot of trauma, and especially some of the main characters.
Yeah, I mean, talking about Jessica and her relationship with Kilgrave. We got to talk about Daredevil. We got to talk about, a number of the folks on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., all of whom have suffered from some sort of trauma in some way, shape, or form. And of course, we got to talk about Agent Carter, who may be living in the past, but at the same time, she is surrounded by loss. And it was, it's weird when we're talking about trauma and loss and grief and to say that this was a fun panel, but it was a fun panel. These are fun people to talk to.
Well, I mean, I think the writers are able to bring in that rich discussion and talk about their process in terms of developing the characters and understanding the dynamic and the relationships. So I think they really bring a lot of those more fascinating discussions into a panel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Drea, that audio is up. Where can folks find it?
They can go to fanboycomics.net, and it is under the WonderCon 2016 panel reviews.
Yeah, and if you happen to download or stream the Arkham sessions from a site like fanboycomics.net or from underthemaskonline.com or from our Facebook page, just go to one of those pages. We'll be sure to link you to this panel. You should absolutely listen to it if you haven't had the chance. Drea, I want to talk about this episode of Batman the Animated Series. I'm very excited about it because we get to revisit the Riddler. We get to see yet another case of reform. Maybe?
I think there's an interesting obsession with the animated series, at least in the what we would consider the second or third volumes, in the way that they're packaged in the box set, around recovery, reform, turning over a new leaf, however you want to call it. And I think my guess, I don't exactly know, but my guess is that the writers were quite astute about the response surrounding the origin stories of Two-Face and Clayface and gosh, Mr. Freeze, in better understanding that what makes these villains really fascinating is not so much these terrible things that they're doing, but their closeness to wellness, their closeness to perhaps becoming good again. I once was good, I can be good again. That kind of framework. And so I'm seeing a lot of these similar themes come up around recovery and essentially learning lessons from their history of criminality.
Let's go back and revisit the Riddler through the episodes that we've covered before. Not all of them, but let's certainly go back to the beginning with "If you're so smart, why aren't you rich?"
Hey, that's quite the accusation.
It's a fair question. That was the first opportunity we had to get to know Edward Nygma. And he, to me, seemed to have a valid complaint. He was a person who had designed a video game, and that there was someone who was profiting from that video game far more than he was. He wanted royalties. He sued them for those royalties. He got fired, and now he decided to take it out on his employer. It seems to me that while he may have gone too far in becoming a supervillain by doing this, he at least had a legitimate complaint and an argument against those he perceived as having wronged him. Then he decided to go against the Batman because the Batman had stopped him during that first appearance, and he seemed to be the only one that could adequately go up against Edward Nygma when it came to intelligence. And Nigma seemed to take that personally, and then also took it as a bit of a challenge to defeat Batman.
And that was when the dynamic was really, I think, solidified for me in regards to Ed relating to the Batman as someone. I know this is going to sound weird, but a colleague of sorts. Like you and I are both genius level people, and you are the only one who is at my level, and therefore you are also threatening to me. So everything that I do is centered around challenging you and making you question your own sanity and putting these, these riddles and mysteries together just to make you vulnerable and comfortable.
So may I ask a question?
No.
You bring up an excellent point, and it's something that I want to know a little more about. For the most part, when we're talking about Gotham's rogues, when we're talking about Batman's most common supervillains, we're often talking about the Joker, the Riddler, Ra's al Ghul. These folks all seem to have a great deal of respect for Batman. Certainly Ra's al Ghul and the Riddler both view Batman as equals and as a worthy opponent. And the Joker certainly sees Batman as someone with whom he wants to spend the rest of his life, a yin to his yang, etc. It's interesting that Batman has earned this level of respect from like everyone he's going up against.
I agree. And I think that those facets of those relationships, exactly what you're talking about, that connection, that we're alike, that kind of mentality, that drives Batman crazy, pardon the pun, because he doesn't want to be aligned with them. He doesn't see any similarities between himself and any one of these fools, and he despises the comparison.
Now, let me ask, just to play devil's advocate, wouldn't they feel the same way? Wouldn't the Riddler be offended by you putting him in line with someone else? Wouldn't Ra's al Ghul be offended by you saying he has an equal to, and then someone to whom he sees no resemblance? Like, what's different in that regard?
Yes, we've talked about narcissism in previous episodes, and those are two villains in particular who have high levels of narcissism and grandiosity. And yes, I would agree with you that close comparison would, they would dismiss that. At the same time, he is the only person who threatens them, who's able to solve the riddle, who's able to be a physical match for them. It's interesting you paired up kind of like a mental match with Riddler and a physical match with Raj.
Well, also a mental. I mean, Ra's al Ghul feels that Batman is worthy to take on. I mean,
spiritually, I think there's a physical aspect to that, but I also think there's the spiritual aspect. Like,
sure.
Only Batman truly understands that sort of that more spiritual, higher level philosophical understanding of why we're here and what our importance is. Mm-hmm. Now, Raj has a very twisted view of that, but I think that, again, he would perceive Batman as having some familiarity with those aspects.
And even you would say that Batman, like you're almost Batman's surrogate in this case. Like you would say that only Batman can be the Batman. Well, only Batman is worthy of being, this great savior of Gotham City.
I can't think of anyone else who could do it.
All right, it's fair. I like that this episode gives Riddler a chance to reform. The writers of this series give their villains chances to make good from time to time. We're actually going to talk more about that at great lengths I think, after the series, where we're doing a wrap up, because this is just one of many Reformation episodes, and I think we should cover them all and look back at the characters as a whole. But Riddler is released from prison, and as Batman does, he instantly jumps on him and is ready to pounce, because Batman just can't believe that the Riddler would go straight.
What's in the box?
None of your business.
I'm making it my business.
Okay, you and I both know how this episode ends. However, couldn't one argue that treating someone this way is self-fulfilling prophecy?
Oh, right. I mean, immediately there's this animosity. You're talking about Batman's perspective, his interaction with the Riddler, right? Yeah, there's this expectation. Once a criminal, always a criminal. Mm-hmm. And again, we've talked about Batman. He sees himself as complex. He sees others in a very black and white way, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I understand the complexity of morality and the law and the relationship between what's right and wrong. Mm-hmm. And I can bend those rules, and I can answer, or my answers are in some ways superior to the law. But when he understands and perceives other people, it's very black and white. So once a criminal, always a criminal. Mm-hmm. Once you've been in Arkham, you need to go back to Arkham.
Right.
I don't know that. I know we've had some examples where Batman has demonstrated much more emotional flexibility and more cognitive sophistication, but his default is, you're a criminal. All your behaviors are going to directly relate to your your selfish needs. Mm-hmm. And so his interaction with the Riddler, demonstrates that.
We find out that the Riddler is actually there on business when his business partner, a gentleman who owns a toy company, decides to reveal himself and says that the Riddler has actually signed a licensing agreement and is the new face of this toy company. Batman and Robin are both really confused by this. I, however, don't understand the confusion. I'll tell you why. To me, this seems like it is completely in line with Edward Nygma's personality from day one. He was suing his former company, which was a video game company that was making money off of his creation. He enjoyed creating riddles. He enjoyed creating puzzles. He enjoyed creating games. It seems to me like he is now going back to where he was. And at this point, he is now famous. And at this point, he now is potentially rich, which is exactly what he wanted to begin with before he became a criminal.
So if Batman were not in this equation, we would see this as very consistent with his previous.
He's now just gotten a different job, a better job. And
well, now he's well known. He's a celebrity.
Exactly.
So people want to buy his Riddler toys, his little pyramid, Riddler mid.
Sure. Yeah. And to me, that makes sense. They seem surprised that, who would want to buy Riddler toys? They were already buying Riddler toys before they knew that he was the Riddler, So that to me,
he's capitalizing on his celebrity status and on what's interesting is that he also creates these toys that are nearly impossible to solve. Mm-hmm. So he's kind of showing off his genius level intelligence and his ability to create really challenging riddles.
I just want to imagine that the Riddler is specifically creating toys similar to the video game in The Last Starfighter, where if the child is able to defeat or solve the riddle, he or she can join Riddler's minions because only they are intelligent enough to defeat the puzzle. I like thinking that there's maybe some sort of other reason for these. There probably isn't. The entire thing, ultimately, let's just get down to it. It's a trap for Batman because he's still bitter over the fact that Batman has always beaten him. And he's beaten him in very, I would say, brutal ways. It's the Riddler's own fault. I mean, the Riddler, the last time we really saw the Riddler, he was trapped in his own virtual reality machine. When he was drawing them in, they ended up fighting in the VR world, and the Riddler ended up getting stuck there. Now, the last time we physically saw the Riddler, he was in the jury during the trial of Batman. Now, Riddler didn't say a word in that entire episode.
He was very quiet.
Which means he could have easily been still stuck in the virtual reality world. We're not sure.
Like his body is in the courtroom, but his mind is still stuck in this virtual reality game.
So I have no idea what's happened to his mind from that point to this. And I don't know how he got out. Needless to say, he is still quite bitter over this when it comes to Batman. And this entire licensing thing is just an elaborate riddle for Batman in the hopes of luring Batman into some trap once again where he can kill Batman or defeat Batman, etc. Something stuck out to me. At one point, they are watching television.
Still no verdict in the trial of the Penguin. Though apprehended last month by the Batman, the jury still remains unconvinced of the felon's guilt.
Trey, did you get the sense that this is now becoming a running thing for criminals that Batman brings in? It seems to me like maybe felons brought in by the Batman are having a hard time getting found guilty instantly. Now, this could be the Penguin having, rigged the jury or something, but...
Or having friends, I use friends very loosely, involved in the system. I've been watching a lot of Daredevil, and so I'm wondering, some of these themes come up as far as like what evidence is inadmissible, and I'm wondering if like evidence that's been brought in, folks don't trust Batman. Maybe they think he's tampered with evidence. Maybe they think that he's not technically a part of the legal system. So I can imagine scenarios where it would be much more challenging to really charge somebody like the Penguin.
I mean, it's a fair question, and maybe especially now that these criminals keep getting out, whether it's by escape or via parole. I mean,
well, the Riddler was let out for good behavior,
right?
And behavior was
right.
IOUR behavior.
It almost makes it sound like Summer is implying that this is yet another case where somebody Batman brought in, they're having trouble with evidence. Maybe Gotham City is turning a little bit on the Batman. I don't know.
I don't know what makes you think that Gotham City is all aligned with Batman all the time. There's a lot of tension and rift, and it's not as if there's this collaboration between the political system and the legal system and Batman. I think there's a lot of corruption going on, and so it doesn't surprise me.
Batman is determined to catch him in a criminal act.
He's got a multi-million-dollar deal with that toy company. Why would he throw it away over some stupid riddle crime?
Because that's the way his warped mind works.
Yeah. Is that fair?
Well...
That's a really unfair statement for Batman to make, don't you think?
Well, and Batman has been trapped in the Riddler's, video game that was essentially created to destroy him. So,
which means that Batman's maybe a little too biased. Like maybe he's
totally
like, no, this isn't happening again. Like,
yeah, I mean, I think there's this defense mechanism that gets kicked in, and the last thing that Batman wants to do is get trapped, literally, figuratively too, but he does not want to get trapped by the Riddler's antics. And so he wants to be one step ahead of him, meaning he wants to capture him. He wants to have evidence that the Riddler is committing crimes, and he wants to do it in a way that prevents the Riddler from engaging in this, huge potentially violent, life-threatening type of scenario or presentation, because we know the Riddler, like the Joker, is also quite egocentric.
Right.
And most of his riddles, he's the center of it. He's, typically the one who looks good.
Which brings me to my next point. Batman goes to a site where there appears to be a criminal activity happening. The Riddler is in charge of it. Batman is about to apprehend the Riddler, and then we find out that they are at what looks like a celebration, a party in the Riddler's honor, presumably for having signed this licensing deal or whatever. The Riddler unveils the conversation between the two of them, and the party begins to laugh at Batman.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet the great Batman. He's here because he hasn't got a clue.
Again, this is one of those, Gotham City could be kind of turning on Batman. Batman doesn't really seem thrilled by this reveal. Batman likes to hang out in the shadows, but he's smack dab in the center of it. Now this entire room is seeing him, which isn't something that Batman often lets people do. But they are all seeing him. They are all laughing at him. And his response is,
You can play all you like. You and I both know that I'm going to put you away because you can't help yourself. You can't stop.
he is going to commit a crime, and Batman is going to be there when that happens.
I want you to hold on to that thought, as it will come up later.
So I want to talk about the fact that the Riddler is in a similar situation that the Penguin was in when the Penguin tried to reform. He goes to the socialite party, and the difference is the Penguin is the one laughed at, and the Riddler is the one getting the rest of the party to laugh at the Batman. Did you find that interesting?
You know, I didn't quite make that connection, but that's true. I mean, in a way, the Riddler is the bully here, right? Mm-hmm. That he is, he tends to want the attention, and he wants to be seen as the smartest. And in this case, he has some attention from women. So add, the notion of also being super attractive. And so he's holding all of these core schema, and then there's Batman, who he wants to ridicule. He wants to make him the center of humiliation. And so, I mean, that dynamic makes sense, right? If everyone is making fun of this person and deriding this person, that lifts me up.
To some degree, you got to think that he is used to being the one who's the butt of the jokes, because he's very uncomfortable when the women approach him, almost as if to say, like, wait, this doesn't have, He was kind of uncomfortable with that. So there is a part of him that is aware that he is not at the top of every game, like this is a new thing for him. Well, we've talked about narcissism in previous episodes, and I think it's a good idea to kind of revisit that. Like, what do we mean by narcissism? Sometimes we just mention narcissism as a personality trait, and it can be something that is pretty long-standing, something that if we identify someone as being narcissistic, that's a pretty stable trait. And then there's also narcissistic personality disorder, which is a much more pervasive and problematic mental health disorder that's a part of one of the clusters of personality disorders that we've talked about before. So think about the Riddler within the context of narcissistic personality disorder, in the sense that he has this great need for admiration, that he lacks empathy for other people, right? He doesn't really quite connect with other people on an emotional level or understand their suffering very much. Sure. He has this sense of self-importance. He's preoccupied by fantasies of unlimited success, power, attraction. He believes that he's unique, and that no one really understands him. So, right. I'm so good that few people really understand what my life is like. And then there's this interesting, underneath that, there's this interesting dynamic of being envious of others, of being
very quite interested in other people's success and even some self-loathing and insecurity that, superficially you may not notice. How can this man be insecure? He thinks he's the greatest gift on earth, right?
But that insecurity is what's giving him that thought that he is the greatest and that no one gets him.
It's those arrogant beliefs and behaviors that kind of keep him going. But you're right. Underneath that, there is this fear of vulnerability. And so as he's relating to other people, as we see him challenge Batman, you can kind of see that dynamic really come about.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Riddler isn't entirely shy about admitting to his goons, at least, that this is all one big ruse.
He's right, you know.
Who?
Batman. He is going to catch me, sooner or later.
Gee, boss, you're scaring me. You're talking kind of crazy.
Don't you ever call me that! I fooled the police, the doctors, the parole board, all of them. There's only one person who's ever been able to challenge me. Batman. He's the only one worthy of the game.
Eventually, when Batman does solve the riddles and does end up coming to defeat Nigma, Nigma thinks that he's killed him in this gigantic explosion.
I always feel sad at funerals. Yes, truly, part of me has died tonight. And so it is time to move on.
And he gives up the Riddler persona. He's back to being Edward Nigma.
Yeah, he like throws his tie and his little bowler hat into the fire.
As if to say, the only thing that kept this personality going was the existence of my rival, of my equal. And now that equal is gone, I no longer have to be the Riddler. I find myself wondering if he could have then gone on to just be...
This kind of goes back to your theory about like Batman in many ways
is the problem.
Yeah, like he facilitates this idea that villains have to be involved in wrongdoing and crime, and that they, in a way, he stokes their fire.
Yeah. Like the Riddler could have become Edward Nigma, the licensing king of whatever toy company in Gotham City, and he could have just kept making toys for kids and for people that he probably didn't see worthy of having the toys, but it was his compulsion to make the toys, and he may have gone straight, except Batman didn't die, which really bothers the Riddler. Like there was no way that Batman could have survived, and the Riddler desperately wants to know how he did it.
It's impossible, I tell you! Impossible! My trap was perfect! How did he do it? I have to know! Somebody tell me! It's not fair! There was no way, I tell you! No way he could have gotten out! Somebody tell me! Do you hear me? Somebody tell me how he did it! I have to know! I have to know!
Drea, we got a question over at our community at mz.com. John Larson asks, at the end of the episode, the Riddler cannot figure out how Batman escaped the explosion. Has Riddler snapped as we see him screaming in Arkham?
We need to revisit the myth of snapping or cracking or popping or whatever. That idea, you liked that, right?
Yeah, that's great.
The idea that you go from being high functioning or getting by, and then there's like one trigger or one event, and you completely unravel. That is a myth of sanity versus insanity, so to speak. Like, really what happens is that we are largely shaped by our environment, the things that happen to us, the things that, the hardships, the stressors, and the trauma that we experience.
Sure.
And then we interact with the environment. And while we try to preserve ourselves, I mean, there's this sense of self-preservation, there's this sense of wanting to be well, there's this sense of wanting to recover. Ultimately, I think this is more of an example of that facade being stripped from him, and his intelligence being questioned, his reality being kind of ripped from him, and realizing that he does have faults, and realizing that another human being has outsmarted him and could identify more with being a genius than he could. And so this is a huge, this could be a huge chasm for him. Like, this is a big insult. This is a wound for him.
Sure.
And while we're seeing this really dramatic impact, I think more what we're seeing is this kind of emotional cry. Like, I didn't realize how vulnerable I am. This is a cry for help. This is my needing to better understand, why am I so alone and vulnerable?
See, and I would have taken it as a little more of a, I don't know if it's like I would have thought that it might have been a little bit of a disorder in there, where it was a need that was literally nagging at him.
Yeah, like some kind of intrusion.
Yeah, like I don't want to use any labels, but yes, this intrusive worm that's just kind of in his brain, and he's not comfortable if he doesn't know how it happened.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that could just drive him crazy, not knowing.
Well, I mean, you bring up a really good point, because we see that he's in distress. He's experiencing high anxiety. He's ruminating. He's
and no one there
sleep.
is going to be able to help him. Like, they're not going to be able to tell him how Batman escaped,
Well, there could be a therapist that could help him cope with the uncertainty and not knowing.
Right. Why do you need to know? Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are therapists.
I'm not
that
saying
could do
you're
that.
wrong. I'm not saying that this isn't a sign or symptom of a mental health problem. In fact, this could be some kind of precursor. This could be what we would consider a stressor in his environment that triggered that pathway to having ruminations, anxious obsessions, the need to know. And that is a clinical term that for folks with anxiety disorders, in particular obsessive compulsive disorder, there is that nagging, intrusive need to know. And that could be a sign of that. So I don't discount what you said at all.
Well, I'm glad you said obsessive compulsive disorder, because that's what I was actually, and I didn't want to say it, out of turn. Well, how did he get out of the explosion? Well, he Indiana Jones did. He got into the fridge, and the fridge protected him from an explosion. And what the part that I find interesting is Robin's reaction to this once he hears the story.
Man, I'd have never thought of that.
Neither would the Riddler.
I think the troubling part about this reaction is the idea that Bruce is shrugging off the fact that Robin wouldn't have figured this out. And if it had been Robin instead of Batman, Robin would be dead right now. I'm thinking maybe Robin needs to go through a little more training. This should have been a red flag for Batman to hear that his ward wouldn't have thought to get into the fridge.
Yeah, well, and this is a lesson he just learned, that if he's in a situation like that, now he knows what to do. But
I think
it's confirming.
but yes,
It's confirming though for Bruce, like not confirming. Okay, we're safe. Confirming, but like when I say confirming, I don't mean assuring. I mean confirming, like validating one of those thoughts that, or even one of the core schema that Batman holds, which is, I'm not sure anyone else could do this. No one else could be the Batman. And Robin just confirmed that for him.
Right. Yeah, that's still a scary proposition for me. I never would have thought of that. Maybe you should have.
Maybe you shouldn't be Robin.
Yeah, maybe I'm not done with you, Robin.
Maybe Jason would know.
Oh, too soon. Drea, what really stuck out for you during this episode?
What stuck out for me was the Riddler's ability to fool enough people to get out of Arkham Asylum.
I fooled the police, the doctors, the parole board, all of them.
So, Drea, let me ask you this question because you bring up an excellent point. What would be required of someone in Arkham Asylum or Stonegate or Blackgate for what would be required of them to fool all of the right people to get out?
Well, it's interesting. There are actual assessments that we do not only to evaluate the wellness or recovery of a patient, but also there are examinations that could let us know if a person is what we call in my field faking good or faking bad.
You've got those terms, faking good and faking bad.
Well, okay, so faking bad is malingering.
Right.
So obviously it's exaggerating symptoms. There might be reasons for that. And then there's something called faking good. Faking good is sometimes called defensiveness, but if you think about the psychometric field, faking good means on an evaluation, on an assessment, during a clinical interview, that somebody is lying or misrepresenting themselves in order to come off as not having a psychiatric condition.
Okay.
And so you might ask, like, well, why would people do this? There are a number of reasons. One, of course, is early discharge from the hospital, especially if someone is involuntarily admitted there.
Sure.
Another is, we see this a lot with like maybe divorced parents, couples who are fighting over custody of a child. You might see that they lighten or mask or filter some of their responses because they want to come off as good parents. And then, of course, applicants for certain jobs. Sometimes certain jobs will require personality tests, or in my agency, we have something called an integrity test.
Ooh.
And so it says a lot about you if you come in and take that exam. And then more commonly, you have prison inmates who are requesting parole. And so there are exams that can help to detect the, I guess you would say, responses that are inaccurate, false, misrepresenting that person's mental health condition, their personality, their wellness, their ability or capacity to live in the community. And so you're going to have a wide range of questions, inquiries, interview type interactions, and a good evaluation will be pretty thorough and will require a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist, and will also require more objective tests. So not just having a clinician ask questions, but also having those data-driven, those standardized tests that you can take on a computer, or even paper pencil if you need to, that will really require the person to be consistent in their responses, to be accurate in the way that they're representing themselves. And they don't even realize that some of the questions that are kind of planted in those larger written assessments are included there to detect misrepresentation of a person's mental health. So it would be, I guess, pretty unethical for me to tell you what those questions are. So I'm not going to do that.
Okay.
But I will say that it is, these tests are designed to detect faking bad and faking good.
Interesting. So the Riddler would have needed to have either known those questions, or he would have simply been able to, his brain would have been able to work it like a test or a riddle, and he would have been able to unlock the correct answers in order to at least pass this test.
Yeah, there are actually a number of ways that people coach folks to mislead assessors. And
that's got to be pretty
it's a cool job. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But
this is like the SAT sort of prep test,
kind of. I don't know if coaching is the right word, but like teach people. I'll give you a personal example. When I was working with service members, I had several of them confess to me that they had talked to their buddies and their colleagues and friends, and that they knew what to say. They had been told and even had written material on what to say in order to meet criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, I want to be very careful to explain that doesn't mean that everyone who's endorsing certain symptoms of PTSD don't have it in that context. But I did have patients reveal to me that they had people approach them and ask them, is this something you would want to know? Is this something that would benefit you? And there could be advantages to meeting that criteria versus other criteria. So in terms of the written assessments that we talked about, especially for inmates who want to be released, something to look out for is when they're very guarded. So they're very, what we would call tight-lipped. They provide very little information, so you can't really get much out of them during interview. The opposite is true as well if they're extremely talkative. So I could see the Riddler being like this, having great claims of knowledge, skills, virtues, accomplishments that just kind of exceed a reasonable likelihood, just going off about all their wonderful accomplishments and how great they are and how capable they are to convince you that they're ready to be placed in the community. That would be a sign. That would be problematic for me as an assessor.
Right.
And of course, there's something that's actually a little bit more difficult to detect, and that's when a respondent alters or just changes the way they behave with the assessor in particular. So they might be quite kind and generous and friendly and charming to an assessor, whereas you might have evidence from other folks, other doctors, other family members that will attest to their their violence, their abusive behavior, their more predictable, persistent behavior outside of the relationship between you and that person. So that is a huge red flag. You feel very good about someone and you actually want to throw them a bone, but then you have all this evidence that is contrary to that feeling that you had in person. And so that brings me back to what you were saying earlier about a person's being, a personality type persisting. And the quote that I wanted to bring up is one that we think about in practice. People cannot help but be themselves. People cannot help but be themselves. So in other words, personality persists, behavior persists, attachments persist throughout a person's lifetime. That doesn't mean people can't change.
Okay.
But we didn't say fixed. We didn't say static. We said persist, right? So people can fake good. People can fake bad. People can try to convince professionals, especially mental health professionals, that they're different than how they are. But over the long run, people's personality traits and general way of being, that tends to be the same throughout their lifetime. And so part of me kind of aligns with Batman. Now I'm not saying that someone can't change, and I've experienced with my relationships with patients, I've experienced a lot of change. But what Batman's message is in this episode is that idea of someone being consistent and stable in their, in their way of being. And I agree with that in this case.
But it also is a double-edged sword because Batman himself can't help but to be Batman. And for better or worse, that might be, like I said, a self-fulfilling prophecy. If he sort of bullies a villain into remaining a villain, Batman can only thank himself for that.
Well, that's a really good point. People can't help but be themselves. So Batman can't help but be suspicious and at times depressive, at times unsettled, uncertain, unable to self-regulate. Yeah, I would probably say that's true.
Drea, we got another question from one of our dearest listeners, Leah. It's been a little while since we've heard from her, but because she loves the Riddler, I'm glad she decided to email us. We've talked a little bit about this question already, but she has an interesting spin on it. In her question, she says, as the audience, we never get to find out how long Riddler's consciousness was stuck in that virtual reality. You and I discussed that.
Yeah.
Nor the time between him coming back to the real world, the events of the trial, and the beginning of this episode. Ergo, would it stand to reason that this second chance at life would simultaneously put two different ideas into Ed on how he should spend it, considering the ideas would be, A, I need to get out of this line of work because it almost got me killed / brain dead, or B, I need to prove that I am the one in control because getting stuck in my own contraption is a sign of weakness. So he could very well have conflicting thoughts on having been trapped in his own VR.
Well, I like where she's going with the idea that experience really impacted him. That for clearly, now we don't know how long he was trapped in there, but there are some lessons learned from that experience that he had. And so I like the direction she's going in. That where would that lead? Which pathway would he take after that experience? Would it be a sort of I don't know, post-traumatic growth type direction of I learned from my mistakes and I need to practice self-care and I need to self-preserve and try to stay away from this dangerous thing? Or, is it much more troubling? And it also makes me think about this entire interaction that he has, like, could this potentially be happening in his mind?
See, I was actually going to go in a completely different question, and it actually just occurred to me as you were talking. I think maybe his good behavior was him in a completely vegetative state. I think he was only showing signs of good behavior because he couldn't be bad.
He was just a compliant, mindless robot.
Right.
And this could also just be all occurring within the brain within the mind of little Sherwood.
That poor
Which
kid.
is one of the most disturbing ideas, I think.
Let me just remind you, you're the one who had that idea. So, at least if someone's going to have an idea like that, it would be you. So, Drea, what were your overall thoughts about this episode? Did you like it?
Yes, I did. I liked the aspect of recovery and rehabilitation. And in this case, we can compare it to other villains that truly were effortful and wanted to change and did all the right things, but unfortunately, society continued to treat them a certain way. And in this case, we can juxtapose those episodes with this narrative of from the very beginning, there was this motive, there was this target. And so, I think it's a reminder that Batman's lessons are our lessons. What did you think, Brian? What from this episode moved you?
I think we discussed it. I become a little more suspicious of Batman and the driving force to not allow people to reform. Now, in this case, the Riddler didn't really have an intention of reforming, but it does remind me of previous episodes. We've seen other of the Gotham Rogues try this very same thing. We saw Penguin try it. We saw Killer Croc try it to some degree. We saw Poison Ivy try it, and now we're seeing this. It's just, and each time it's Batman's pursuit. Batman just kind of needles them a little bit.
It's almost like, are you saying he pushes them over the edge?
Well, no, we're definitely going to talk about this on a future episode, so I don't want to get into it too much here. But it's like you said, Batman can't help but to be Batman. It just brings about that question of, will his mission ever be over? Because will Batman ever allow that mission to be over?
Well, I will ask you this. Would you rather be in a building that's about to explode with Robin or with Batman?
Well, it depends on how much room there is in the safe. But as of right now with Batman, because clearly Robin's gone through a little too little training. So, Drea, until next week, where can folks find you online? I'm
on Twitter at Arkham Asylum Doc. You can check out my website, underthemaskonline.com.
And you can find me on Twitter. I am at bward028. We both handle the Arkham Sessions Twitter account. That is at Arkham Sessions. You can also email us. We are arkhamsessions@gmail.com. Of course, we are going to tell you, you need to come join our community over at IMZY. That is imzy.com/Arkham. Join our community and you might win an Arkham Sessions t-shirt that is beautiful, art by Tom Zoller. And then, of course, you need to follow Our friends over at Fanboy Comics on Twitter, they are at Fanboy Comics. Comics is spelled with an X. Or go to their website, fanboycomics.net.
Before we end this episode, I just want to give a quick shout out to our friend David King, who we got to meet in person. He was cosplaying as Dr. Jonathan Crane. He had an amazing cosplay going on at WonderCon. I just wanted to say hello to him virtually, wave hello. He runs the Midnight Marinara podcast, a monthly podcast that turns creepypasta tales into eerie audio plays.
Which sounds awesome.
Don't you want to learn more about that?
Yes.
So David, hello from the Arkham Sessions.
And I don't know that we got to meet his friend, but she was
yes.
Harleen Quinzel, and they were both cosplaying these characters just on the bubble of going bad.
Yeah.
Like it was just like they weren't quite there, but they were getting there. And she had the greatest prop, which was a clipboard with paper on it.
It was basically her doctor's notes with some appointments and additional cool little notes and things written in there.
Like little character like Mrs. Joker, Mrs. You know, it was awesome.
It was awesome.
Yeah, great job, guys. So until next week, I am Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.